Well, we have a little time here in the offseason at Soccerwise, and we love to talk to the people around the game who are making things happen and the people who we find most interesting to talk soccer with. And there's no one higher on that list than the director of football and the head coach of the Chicago Fire, Gregg Berhalter. Greg, thanks for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. Nice to hear from you.
So let's start looking back. What is your favorite moment of 2025? When as you get to the end of the year and you look back on your first year with the club, what comes to mind?
That's a great question. I think there was a lot of good moments, but it's like anything, like any season. It's a roller coaster, and that's the fun part about it. MLS is such a tough league. If you think about our team in particular, we won 9 games away from home, and 6 at home. It just doesn't make any type of sense. So you could imagine if you won 6 games at home, there's 11 that you didn't win. You either got a tie or a loss, and that in itself was extremely frustrating, I think, for everybody. But I have to say the fans, stuck with us and they were behind us, and I think they enjoyed some of the football that was being played, and and we want to do better at home. But I think so. That was certainly a low point. Some of the high points were, some of the road wins we had, some of the watching the team build, watching the team grow throughout the year, and we got to a good point towards the end of the season.
For you, it was the first time you were back on the field day in and day out in 7 years. I know that was something you were excited about. What was the experience like to be back on the grass?
It's amazing. I think you forget about it. When you're with the national team, it's also such a rewarding job. But there's nothing like working with a team day in and day out and seeing the progress and seeing players develop and seeing the tactical understanding grow and being able to make small adjustments that have an impact because the guys really are tuned into what's happening. So to me, that the whole process was really, really great.
How have you seen yourself change as a coach coming out of the 7 years in a different setting and now back into that day-to-day?
Yeah, well, you remember me from Columbus, and it was really only about, how we played. That was so important to us. The national team, really helped me with the importance of winning and expectations, and so I think now with Chicago, it's a combination. We push the guys really hard. We challenge them really hard because we know what's in them, and we want to play a certain way, and we also want to get the results, and we're focused on getting a result each and every time we're on the field.
It's interesting you say that because I said a lot of times we heard your language as national team coach shift from tactical to about spirit and fight and belief, which it felt like it was a reality of you can only affect so much as often as you're with those players. Is that sort of the case?
That's part of it, but I think we grew over time to a very good understanding by the player pool of what we're trying to do. So I think that's the case. But I also started to realize that people don't give a crap about your tactics. So like it's wasting time. All they want to do is see you win. And I can talk about how we use Tyler as an inverted right back playing center mid early on in 2019. People don't give a crap about that. They want to see you win, and that's all they care about. So I purposely backed off of the tactical talk probably in like the fall of 2019.
Yeah. Interesting, because we saw that happen from the outside, but we're sort of processing it differently. Yeah. But we're the ones who cared, so we're the ones.
Yeah, exactly. You're the ones that didn't get any of the good information.
Exactly. Yep. Now with Chicago, how do you see your tactical identity right now? Because one of the big stories this year was you guys were a great attacking team, but struggled defensively, which wasn't the case for your teams in the past.
Yeah, that was frustrating. But not a lot different from the early days of Columbus. We weren't great defensively. I think we got to a point where we were really good. With the national team, we were good defensively. It was frustrating. A lot of it had to do with personnel changing and for the choice. I think backline, lack of continuity. And then midfield, the choices that we made in midfield because we wanted to be an attacking team. And when you make those choices, something has to give. And so we suffered a little bit defensively. It's something we want to improve on next year. We have to improve on next year if we want to be, in the conversation for one of the better teams in MLS. So we'll focus on that. And I think, for me, I think about, our identity a lot. And, I don't think it stands out necessarily, but I don't think it needs to stand out. I think if we're proficient in each phase of the game and we understand, we want to be a team that controls the ball, we want to build from the back, we want to be able to create attacks through disorganizing the opponent. Defensively, we want to be able to win the ball back as soon as possible. I think if we can do those things, we'll be effective, and that's what's really important.
It's interesting because there's a conversation around Major League Soccer because it's a salary cap league of what wins. Is it being solid and consistent, or is it these outlier teams where you have a San Diego and a Philadelphia who are on the two extremes? Do you feel like the road forward is that middle of the road of just being solid in every phase?
Well, let's take a look at Arsenal as an example, right? They're leading the Premier League.
Mm-hmm.
What's their identity?
Set pieces.
It doesn't stand out, though, from right? When you watch them play, you don't say, hey, they're an outlier, right?
Yeah.
They just do things really well. And I think that's when you start to look at top soccer nowadays, that's what's happening. There's not too many teams that have this really unique identity that you say, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. Give San Diego credit. I think they did. Philadelphia definitely does, as you said. But at the end of the day, both those teams didn't win the MLS Cup.
Yeah. How do you look at, though, a style for a supporter shield versus style for a knockout tournament setup?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that what I've seen in MLS is a lot of teams have an identity of what they're trying to do, which I think is really positive. When you come to a knockout type of tournament, anything can happen, and it's really about the performance of that night. And you think about San Diego is a great example. They played really well all year, but the game against Vancouver, they had a really poor game.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't good in any phase of the game, and it was really unlike their performance throughout the season. And I think Vancouver benefited from playing in all those competitions, understanding what knockout was, and were really efficient and strong in those moments.
You brought up Vancouver, so I have to ask. I think one of the coolest stories of the year, of course, was your son, Sebastian Berhalter, his performances. What was the year like for you as a dad and as a fan?
Well, I rewind back to last offseason. We were in Naples for the offseason. I think we were playing golf, and he said to me, Dad, I think, next year is going to be my year. And, he's like, I feel like I'm ready. And it really, struck me that he was that confident what he was saying. But I was also like, okay, well, why do you think that? Anybody can just say that, but, what are you doing here? And he's like, I'm prepared. I feel like I'm prepared and confident going into preseason. And it was, really interesting because they had a new coach, so you don't know what the new coach is going to bring, but I still think he had enough confidence in himself, and enough belief in his process that he felt like he was prepared to have a good season. And to see it play out, I think is the way it did is really rewarding, because I know how much hard work he's put in over the years.
Does it change your perspective in your job at all? Experiencing him now, obviously you played yourself, but experiencing him now from the other side?
A little bit. I think that, I'm a lot, I think, more cautious with late developers. I think we as coaches, you tend to think, okay, if this guy's not in the moment right now, then he's never gonna make it. Mm-hmm. Whereas Sebastian, if you would have said that, and I think he did have one of his coaches say, listen, you're never going to be a starter in MLS, and so for us, we have to take a step back and really look at everything with this athlete. Where is he at from a developmental standpoint? What's his tactical understanding? What's his mentality like? And then I think you can make a more informed decision.
One of the big roles for you as director of football, but also in Chicago, is youth development and the talent pool that is around you. It hasn't been maybe as successful as people would have liked with the history Chicago has as a soccer city. In light of that and what you're talking about with Sebastian, how have you sort of gone about working the academy into what you do and building the pipeline?
That's something I'm so excited about. Working with the kids, where you go out and you see these 13-year-olds. One trip they travel with the first team to games, and just seeing how much potential these young kids have. And we hired some good coaches, and we have a director of methodology that's really in tune with what we're doing as a club. And I think it's going to help. If you look at Chicago, over the course of its history, we've had some homegrowns that have done well, right? Gaga we sold for $15 million. Georgi Mihailovic was, but I agree with you. It needs to be more consistent, to really develop players. We also, believe it or not, we set the record for homegrown minutes this year of any club in the history of MLS. That's crazy, right, to think about?
It helps when your goalkeeper every single game is giving you 90.
No, that's true. And
Yeah.
Guti, but Sergio Origel, Mauricio Pineda, Christopher Cups chipped in. Andrew Gutman played every single game. So, you start to have, guys that are making an impact. But I think we want to be developing. We think this is a great market, really, soccer town, and we want to be really developing the kids, the local kids.
Brian Gutierrez, we get the official news that he's moved to Chivas. What was the story for him this year, and what do you sort of make of what his future potential is?
So we made the decision to play him as an 8 in a 4-3-3, and we challenged him. We said, listen, we know this isn't going to be easy for you. We know you're going to have to do some work that you've never done before. And give him credit. He hung in there, and I think he had a solid year. 10 goals, 6 assists, scored some big goals for us. And, so that's what we wanted to see. We wanted to see how can this player adapt. When you look at teams like, Liverpool, and you look at some of their midfielders, they're not the typical midfielders that you would think, right?
Yeah.
It's McAllister, Sobasai. So, we thought we could do it with him. And, he developed and he got to a good point, and I think now the next step for him is to leave the club. He's been here for 16 years. That's a long time, and we just felt that, for him to take the next step in his career, he has to, to leave the nest, so to speak. And, it's always a sad moment because, we love Guti, we love his contribution to this club over time, but we think it's going to be a great opportunity for him.
The big addition in your attack last year was Philip Zinkernagel, where maybe everyone thought we'd only be talking Jonathan Bamba. Philip Zinkernagel, a special year. What is it that he brought to the team? What is it that makes him so special?
Similar to Andreas Dreyer, where they're just so calm in the penalty box. Like even in training, he scores all the time. And it's that proficiency in the penalty box that really sets him apart. Besides that, he's a lot faster than people think. He's one of the fastest players on our team.
Interesting.
And he can get going. He's great in offensive transition, and he's a good 1v1 attacker. So he's got a ton of qualities to make him a really strong player in this league.
A lot of the questions I'm asking you is about sort of one half of your job, director of football, and the other half head coach. What was the balance like for you between the two roles and how you operate on both sides?
I think it was pretty good. There are times where I get bogged down in the coach's office and I hear it from people in the organization like, oh, we haven't seen you in a little bit. I'm like, but we have a great leadership team in the club, and hopefully it's set up that I don't have to be there for every decision. We have a sporting director, we have a director, head of strategy, we have a GM, we have a head of recruitment. And we have a head of performance. So, that's really the leaders in the team. And we're really trying to set up a strong club from top to bottom. It
feels like when you look at Philip Zinkernagel's resume and you talk about the members of the team, Gregg Berhalter is a huge part of what you're doing. I was lucky enough to sit in a talk that he gave at a youth development forum. Can you tell people a little bit about how he operates and sort of what he's brought to the club?
I went over to England and was visiting clubs there, and I had the opportunity to visit with Blackburn. And he was one of the most thoughtful people that I came across in England in terms of having a process. You know how England can get. I'm sure you saw some of the documentaries, Sunderland Till I Die, and stuff like that. But some of these clubs, they don't work with a process at all.
Yeah.
And it's literally they're going day by day. And with him, they had values, they had a vision, they had a mission, they had great work with the recruitment, great work with academy. They're using data, and so I met him, and we came in contact. We stayed in contact, and when this opportunity came across, I asked him to if he'd be interested in applying for the sporting director job, and he's just really thoughtful. He's in direct control of the second team in the academy. He's very active with transfers with the first team, and I think a great asset for the club.
When you look at the reality in Chicago versus your time in Columbus, it feels very different for a lot of different reasons. Yes. I'll start with this one. I'm going to call it the big game hunting. You were not connected to Neymar and Kevin De Bruyne very often in Columbus. What's that experience like in Chicago, and how do you handle what could be this big face of the club signing?
I'm excited about that prospect because, it's always great to work with top players. That's the first thing. They have solutions that you can't even think of as a coach. I think it helps your management skills to be able to manage top talent. I experienced that with the national team, but at the club level, it would be nice to experience that. The other thing is, we think Chicago's a huge market, and it's ripe for to have a top player here and a big name here. So we're open to that. We don't want to sacrifice what we value, and who we are as a group and what we embody. So it has to be the right fit as well. But we're certainly open to one of these names coming in and really driving not only Chicago but the rest of Major League Soccer.
It feels like this type of signing in the history of MLS goes two ways. One is the player finds the club because they're ready in their career and they're thinking about it. The other is the club goes and finds the player. Do you have a wish list of 10 Ballon d'Or finalists that you're consistently checking up on, or is it just if it happens, it happens?
No, we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes, to realize this goal of bringing a player in. So it's a ton of work, but again, I think it will be worth it for the club and the league.
For 2026, as you talk to the players and talk to the team, what is the stated goals? What are you looking at for this year for the Chicago Fire?
Well, we have to improve. For us, it was a great learning experience, especially towards the end of the season, when the intensity ramps up. In those final games, I felt like mentally, we weren't present enough to actually beat Philly. And you go to Philly, you play a great game, you tie 2-2, you lose in penalty kicks, and then what's next, right? The next step is you win the home game. It has to be.
Yeah.
And we lost that game in strange fashion. But to me, it's about the mentality, and for us, you have to attack each game. I think we did a good job of treating each game as its own opportunity, and that's what we have to do next year. But really attacking it with with high intensity.
You've already made some big changes on the back line. Joel Waterman came in. It felt like that was a fairly opportunistic move to make. And now Mbokazi coming over from South Africa. What does that add to your team? What is the necessity there in obviously the center back position?
Yeah, so we needed to get better defensively. So we addressed that, bringing Joel in, and he made a big impact in a short period of time. And then we said, okay, what does it look like next? And we were able to, to land, I think, one of the top talents in Africa right now as a center back. 20 years old, captain of Orlando Pirates, was starting for the national team. There was a little turmoil recently, but just tremendous talent. And he's a guy that, despite his size, he's not the tallest player, is amazing physicality, great mentality, and battle. So we're looking forward to him and his contribution. And then we have Christopher Cupps, a 17-year-old. He's already played 4 games in MLS as a 16-year-old. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. And we're looking forward to him getting more game time as well.
Is the idea maybe a back three to bring a lot of these guys into the starting lineup?
The way, I don't know if you saw last year, but we did go to back three at times.
Yep.
And for me, it's not really getting hung up on the system. It's really about, how we occupy space, how we close space defensively. And, if we feel like the opponent is forcing us to have an extra defender because of how they're positioned, then we'll add an extra defender. And if not, we'll play with four. And so I think it can be, really versatile.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, because you've been around the game for a while here in North America. Obviously, your time at the national team, you're watching a lot. Now back into it day to day. What do you make of the changes in Major League Soccer, the development, and is it maybe where you thought it would be if I asked you the day you left Columbus?
I think that's a great question. Definitely have seen improvements in a number of different areas. The coaching has improved tremendously. So that's one area where it's really gotten better. I think that our top level talent is higher than it was in the past. What I would say is I think there's this, you didn't play as many young players before, and now a lot of young players are getting an opportunity, and sometimes they're playing, I think whether they're ready or not, and there is this young influx of players that are in the league that I think it will take time to see if they're actually going to make it. But they're getting opportunities where they have it in the past.
Yeah, it feels like, obviously, with the U22 initiative, a stated goal, but it also feels like internally a lot of clubs have made the decision that they need to produce players, whether it's to sell them or have them in their first team.
Yeah, definitely. And then you have to give them opportunities. And it's no different than what happens in Europe. You see, Champions League game, Arsenal's winning 3-0. They put on a 16-year-old to make his debut, right? They understand, did he earn that debut, right? Or is it because of the scoreline and they want to give him an opportunity, they want to raise his market value? So I understand how it all works.
It is going to be a special year in Major League Soccer. I said there's a lot of differences with the way you're operating in Chicago. Maybe in the past, one, it feels like coming is the stadium. As someone working in the club, seeing the renderings, hearing the conversation, how big of a goal is that for the team, and how inspiring is it to potentially be the ones to debut in there?
One of the reasons why I was really excited about this opportunity was because of our owner and how bullish he is on building something impactful for the city of Chicago. And, I didn't sign up with the idea that the stadium would come this soon. This is something that happened after I signed up, but I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because of Joe's commitment to this club and his bullishness on soccer in Chicago and in the United States. And I think it's a huge accomplishment for the club. The president, Dave Baldwin, has been working really hard with the city to get this fast tracked, and it's going to be an absolutely incredible stadium. Our training ground, I don't know if you've seen it at all, is already off the charts, incredible. Yeah. And then to add a stadium that's about 1.5 miles, 2 miles away from the training ground, right in the city of Chicago is unbelievable.
All right, I started you looking back at 25. Let's look forward to 2026. What are you most excited for in this year?
The World Cup.
That's a good one.
Right. I mean, we're hosting the World Cup. Could you believe it? It's going to be an absolutely amazing, I think, experience, an amazing opportunity for Americans to see what the world game is on our home soil. I remember in 1994 the impact it had. And really excited for the impact now in 2026. Besides that, excited to see the growth of all teams. I think it's our obligation to keep things moving, keep things progressing, keep things improving, and excited to see how other teams go about that and how we go about that for next season.
You obviously put blood, sweat, and tears into the national team. What does it feel like to watch a lot of the young players whose debuts you gave and the system you built elevate to the level it has, and as you see the draw, thinking about the players you've worked with for so long being on the field in these big moments?
The one thing I know about the World Cup is you need experience, and to think about, us potentially, we went into 2022 with one player that had World Cup experience. And now to think about, going into this next World Cup with potentially, 18 players that have World Cup experience and in the prime of their careers. And, some of them playing some of the best soccer of their lives. When you look at Christian Pulisic, he's been on fire. Weston McKennie's been doing a great job. And all the other players, Chris Richards, right, who's taking the next step. He got injured before the last World Cup. He wasn't able to take part. So to think about having our players in their prime, to have them with this World Cup experience, and then to have some young players that are knocking on the door and really pushing, are really hungry. To me, it's an exciting opportunity for the U.S. team.
On the MLS side, you last year, where you finished 2 years ago, you would have been fourth in the Eastern Conference. It was a gauntlet in the East. You said
it was brutal.
Progressing things. It feels like the East is accelerating. What do you make of the teams around you and how good they are?
I love it. I mean, I think that, you look at the schedule and you're like, all right, when are we going to get an easy game? And it's just not coming. But having said that, it's again, if you work with a process that's really about the game in front of you, you get results when you don't think you're going to get results. Who thought we were going to go down and beat Miami 5-3 in Miami to clinch playoffs? You know what I mean? But you have to be focused. You have to be, working hard, and you need to bring that intensity each and every game.
Well, we can't wait to see the team back out there once again next season. We appreciate you taking the time to chat with us, and we look forward to doing it again.
You bet.